A nuclear strike is essential. Budanov made a statement that made my blood run cold. The Kremlin suddenly humbled itself. The signal everyone was waiting for. Trump is stepping back from political distance. The American is sick and insane. The White House is issuing statement after statement. Total shock. A deathbed letter. It contains a mention of Ukraine. The first details. A furious strike on Moscow. The fire has spread to the Kremlin. The Russians have blocked the road. Footage that turns propaganda inside out. Lukashenko made a fatal mistake. Zelensky is turning his guns on Minsk. Shots fired without warning. Now it's official. The Hungarian has turned enemy positions into a testing ground for Ukrainian technologies. The Russian generals didn't even have time to sob. All this in our episode Hellpoint. Budanov decisively slammed his fist on the table. There will be no nuclear strike. Putin bit his tongue. The truth has come to the surface. Signals from Kyiv are sharper than ever before. The Kremlin dictator is shoving his bloody attack plan into the drawer. Too late. The moment of truth has come. Our people deciphered the scenario and rewrote it. An atomic bomb set on course for the Kremlin. The exclusion zone has already been marked out. Shocking details ahead. Russia is capable of launching a nuclear strike at any moment and at any distance. This was stated by the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Budanov. He adds, it's not about technical capability, but political will. Crucially, there are no signs of preparations for such a strike.
The nuclear weapon scare tactics were already around back in 2022, when Medvedev openly told everyone that God forbid anything hits Crimea, there would be a nuclear strike on Ukraine, or even on Europe, something like that. Well, the first strikes did happen, I remember, on August 9th, 2022, the first missiles hit. Then the SBU guys launched their Sea Baby drones into Sevastopol Bay, and a lot of other things happened. That's why we'll keep hearing this from time to time, because the Russians have no other argument.
Despite this, Russia's nuclear potential remains a serious threat. Analysts note that Moscow is ramping up its capabilities at the fastest pace since the Cold War. This concerns not only missiles, but also the overall strengthening of military presence near NATO borders. The Russian authorities are also actively using nuclear rhetoric. In particular, Vladimir Putin has spoken about the need to ensure strategic security and has mentioned new missile systems capable of carrying nuclear warheads. According to experts, such statements are a form of pressure and intimidation.
Risks of using nuclear weapons. Well, such risks always exist. But I think we need to understand a simple thing. If the Russians believe that using tactical nuclear weapons would immediately lead to Ukraine's capitulation and that they would face no consequences for it, say from China, the US, or other nuclear states, they would have done it long ago. So we will keep hearing about this, but I think that first and foremost, China is categorically against it, and they have honestly warned the Russians not to mess around.
At the same time, Russia is preparing new strikes against Ukraine. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian intelligence has obtained documents indicating preparations for missile and drone attacks. Among the targets are nearly 24 sites, including political centers and military positions. Ukraine is already responding. The defense forces are strengthening protection and are also preparing both military and sanctions-based responses. The president notes that every Russian strike will have consequences. At the same time, another risk remains from Belarus. According to Ukrainian authorities, Russia is trying to draw Minsk into new operations. This concerns possible actions both against Ukraine, particularly in the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction, and against NATO countries. Infrastructure is already being created on the territory of Belarus that could be used for an offensive. However, according to Ukrainian border guards, there are currently not enough forces there for a full-scale attack. Despite all the threats, the Ukrainian authorities emphasize that the key factor remains the state's ability to resist, because it is war itself, not attempts at intimidation, that determines the real balance of power and the course of the war. Ukraine will undoubtedly defend itself and its people if Alexander Lukashenko makes a mistake and decides to support this Russian intention as well.
They will keep shooting until the end of the war. Our task, well, what strong leverage do we have? Here, it's really just about responding. Retaliatory strikes, strikes to destroy oil and gas infrastructure, and much more, just to collapse the Russian economy.
So the nuclear scenario remains possible, but not inevitable. Russia continues to exert pressure, threaten, and prepare new strikes. But as before, the decisive factor is not weaponry, but political decisions and Ukraine's ability to defend itself. Everyone is urgently talking about this. Trump's behavior has revealed a big secret of the White House. Now there's nothing left to hide. The illness is progressing and the American politician is becoming dangerous to those around him. Shocking footage has already been leaked online. This is why the US president left a message for his favorite Wentz. It's not that simple. A double game is being played in the corridors of Washington. Rubio has started preparing in advance for the moment of truth. What is really happening in American offices and how will this reflect on relations with Ukraine? Let's watch.
Donald Trump is likely suffering from a mental disorder but refuses to undergo a medical examination. There is still no official diagnosis, reports the German publication Zeit, which puts the overall governance of the United States at risk. A new wave of discussion was sparked by an episode in the Oval Office during a recent event dedicated to mothers' health. Trump simply fell asleep in front of a huge crowd. At the same time, the White House, commenting on photos of the president with his eyes closed, claimed that in the pictures the leader was simply blinking. By the way, this is far from the first time that Donald's team has had to justify his physical condition.
This is a minor irritation of the soft tissues caused by frequent handshakes and aspirin, which is taken as part of a standard cardiovascular disease prevention program. This is a well-known and harmless side effect of aspirin therapy. The president remains in excellent condition, which I think you all see every day.
But Americans see something different, which is regularly reported on social media. In recent months, Trump has been displaying increasingly erratic behavior. He makes sharp political statements, threatens to destroy other countries, gives strange public speeches, and shows signs of physical fatigue. Swollen ankles, bruises on his hands that they try to cover up with makeup, dragging his right leg, which he pulls up and then swings. Constant cognitive tests, which Trump for some reason keeps bragging about. Although we still don't understand why he is tested for cognitive ability so often. Political analysts have pointed out that Trump's team has now found themselves confronted by the very same campaign tactics they once used, back when Republicans frequently ridiculed Joe Biden's health in unison.
They don't want that happening with Trump. They don't like it. They say, everyone calm down, stop asking questions. 3 annual medical checkups in 8 months. 3 dentist visits in 5 months. Stop making assumptions. It's irresponsible.
But what most consider truly irresponsible is something else, leaving the United States without leadership or entrusting it to someone who is ill. That's why, as early as 2 years before the end of Trump's term, active discussions began around the topic of his successor.
Marco Rubio will try to run for president. He has a nonprofit, or rather, a super PAC organization which continues to operate just in case it's needed.
Trump himself also spoke about Rubio's presidential prospects in his recent interview with The Hill. There he called a Rubio-Vance ticket the perfect choice for Republicans in the 2028 elections. At the same time, the president refrained from directly endorsing any of the candidates. When weighing each of their chances of becoming president of the United States, it is worth noting that Vance always and in everything supports Trump's position too actively. And considering that the current president's approval rating is relentlessly declining, it will obviously drag J.D. Vance down with him.
His support is fading, and his MAGA supporters are fighting with each other, one against another. Republicans are running to the Democrats, not because the Democrats are wonderful, but because Trump is terrible. The Democrats are winning in almost every election.
According to a recent poll, Marco Rubio has increased his popularity 12-fold. If Americans had to vote today, every third person would cast their vote for him. At the same time, the Secretary of State's position on Ukraine played a significant role in his recognition among Americans. Rubio opposes Witkoff and Kushner, stating that the priority is security guarantees for Ukraine, not business deals, not giving up Donetsk, and not weakening Ukraine from a military standpoint. The priority is security guarantees. So Marco Rubio is still resisting Witkoff, Kushner, and the person behind them, Vice President J.D. Vance. And since there are at least 2 years until the elections, experts are betting that Trump, like his protege Vance, will manage to alienate enough Americans for a politician with a pro-European and pro-Ukrainian agenda to win.
We are currently in a state of a rather cold war with our government trying to turn this country upside down to make us an ally of Russia. And this, in itself, even more than Ukraine, worries and unsettles many Americans because there are certain things that trigger an emotional response, and friendship with Russia for America is very strange.
The nearest results of such US policy will obviously be seen as early as this November, when elections to the House of Representatives will take place in the states. Already today, analysts are predicting a complete failure for both Trump and all his direct political supporters.
After these strikes, Putin is preparing to surrender Moscow in an accelerated fashion. Leaky air defense, strikes on their own territory, and the absolute dominance of Ukrainian drones in the skies over Russia. A new reality has completely engulfed the capital. A record-breaking strike by the Ukrainian armed forces, airport collapse, Russians are panicking. Zelensky is no longer holding back, and this is a well-deserved revenge for Kyiv. Could it be that after such a knockout, Moscow is already entering its final convulsions? More on this ahead.
Fuck. What the hell are you doing right now? Guys, honestly, I never thought this would affect our city, Zelenograd. Basically, we're being bombed. I never thought the war would affect us like this. I just never thought it would.
Ukrainian drone operators send their regards to Moscow's air defense forces. The war has knocked on the windows of the capital and the Moscow region. More than 100 drones attacked Moscow's oil refineries, military facilities, and bases. According to Muscovite eyewitnesses, Russian air defense missed the drones and hit residential buildings instead.
Where are they falling?
Where? There, look. And where did it fall?
Just... basically the air defense hit the neighboring building.
In Moscow and the Moscow region, reports indicate several people killed and dozens wounded. The mutual shelling with Kyiv is Putin's choice, who, after a 3-day truce for May 9th, resumed strikes on Ukraine.
Our responses to Russia's prolongation of the war and strikes on our cities and communities are entirely justified. This time, Ukrainian long-range sanctions reached the Moscow region, and we are making it clear to Russians their state must end its war.
On May 14th, the Russian army struck a residential building in Kyiv. An X-101 missile collapsed the entrance and killed 24 people. On May 17th, the armed forces of Ukraine struck military facilities in the Moscow region involved in the production of cruise and ballistic missiles.
They chose the most unexpected direction, a rear direction. The entire strike on Moscow was carried out from the northwest direction, almost from the north. This starts with Dobna, and Dobna is a plant, a city where the Raduga Design Bureau is located, an enterprise that produces cruise missiles.
Besides Dubna, explosions were also heard in Zelenograd. There are two largest manufacturers of complex microelectronics for missiles in Russia. One of them, the Bryansk plant Kremlin, was struck by the Ukrainian armed forces in March. The second Angstrom JSC was hit by Ukrainian drones on May 17th in Zelenograd.
A well-coordinated strike. Everything is coming from one direction. Moreover, this direction was prepared for the strike because it was reported that supposedly partisans from the Atesh movement disabled several communication towers in the areas of Putilkovo, Komunarka, and Domodedovo.
Today, the target was Sheremetyevo Airport. A drone raid halted the operations of Moscow's air harbor.
The strikes were carried out accordingly on the runway of Sheremetyevo airfield. It is also important to highlight the fact that during the period when the strikes were carried out by Ukrainian UAVs, all air traffic across the skies of the Russian capital was completely blocked, and a total of more than 300 scheduled flights were ultimately cancelled.
Such an attack gives the Ukrainian armed forces an opportunity to probe Moscow's air defense and gather intelligence for future, more massive attacks involving both drones and long-range missiles.
At this very moment, thousands of Belarusians are waiting at the borders. Lukashenko is preparing a new attack. Ukraine is once again in a zone of total risk. The old scenario will no longer work. Zelensky issued a harsh warning to the father: one shot in our direction and Minsk will be wiped off the map forever. Political courtesies have long since ended. In the end, will Ukraine have enough leverage to completely block Russian-Belarusian aggression? Don't miss more about this coming up next.
Lukashenko has dropped his mask. The Belarusian dictator is preparing a second front for another Russian march on Kyiv. Rumors about preparations for an invasion have turned into real actions, as personally stated by Volodymyr Zelensky on his social media page.
Russia is considering operational plans in directions to the south and north from Belarusian territory, either against the Chernihiv-Kyiv axis in Ukraine or against one of the NATO countries.
Lukashenko himself is no longer hiding his desire to go to war. At a meeting with Belarusian generals, the father made it clear that his army should prepare for an offensive.
There's no way forward without a ground operation.
So Belarus is refusing to conduct large-scale exercises. Instead, partial mobilization is being introduced in the country.
Specifically, we will mobilize certain units of the armed forces in order to prepare them for war.
Moreover, Lukashenko is not limiting himself to just Ukraine. According to intelligence, the Belarusian dictator, with the support of the Russian army, is considering the option of invading one of the Baltic countries.
This would involve the seizure of specifically a small portion of territory from one of the Baltic countries. And the calculation is that this seizure would present European countries with a dilemma: either to start a full-scale war with Russia, in which case Eastern Europe, at least its capitals and infrastructure, would become targets for Russian missile and drone attacks, or to try to make peace without an invitation.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are already on alert and waiting for provocations on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. Currently, the defenders have turned the Polisia region into a fortified defensive line. Now, kilometers of field fortifications have been built there, along with hundreds of dugouts for equipment and firing positions. The military also reported that a branch system of minefields and barriers has been created. Therefore, a repeat of the February 2022 scenario should not be expected. Moreover, as analysts assure, despite all the maneuvers and loud statements, Lukashenko is actually unlikely to dare to attack Ukraine.
The absence of serious groups on the border with Ukraine, the absence of large-scale mobilization. In other words, for now, all of this exists only at the level of scare tactics. That is, at the moment, we do not see any serious formations moving toward the border, and we are ready for defense.
And the Belarusian army is clearly not ready for an attack. By getting involved in a military conflict with Ukraine, Lukashenko could lose his country. In a confrontation with well-trained and highly motivated Ukrainian fighters, his army doesn't stand a chance. On the very first day, hundreds of drones will fly toward Minsk and Gomel, and the regular army will easily cross the border and march toward the Belarusian capital.
And suddenly, several battalion tactical groups enter Ukraine. They enter forcefully, take out the professional Marines who are unprepared for defense and only trained to invade foreign territory, and crush the conscript border guards who have never participated in combat at all. And this basically describes the entire Belarusian army.
Not only will the Ukrainian army face little to no resistance, but most Belarusians will gladly side with the armed forces of Ukraine and move to overthrow their unchanging dictator.
Since Belarus is not a huge country and its population is quite homogeneous, mobilization and the need to die for the Russians could lead to a repeat of 2020 in the country. That is, to massive protests involving millions, but this time with weapons in hand and without a powerful Russia backing Lukashenko, because over these years the Kremlin has squandered all its power, both economic and military.
Therefore, all the saber-rattling and loud, provocative statements by Lukashenko about an impending war are just another information and psychological operation and a tool of pressure, analysts assure. The mustachioed dictator regularly uses military rhetoric whenever he needs to bargain something from Russia: money, privileges, or political support. That is exactly what is happening this time.
It's clear that Lukashenko will wriggle out of this any way he can, like a hedgehog, a snake, whatever, because he absolutely does not want to take part in this war. Belarus's economy has already fallen by 5% in this first quarter, compared to 4% in Russia, and it will only get worse because they are tied together. The situation is lousy, although...
However, Putin continues to pressure Lukashenko. We continue to observe Russian attempts to further drag Belarus into the war against Ukraine. We know that there have been additional contacts between the Russians and Alexander Lukashenko aimed at convincing him to join new Russian aggressive operations. So, just in case Ukraine is preparing for the worst, namely to repel an attack from its neighbors. And even though such a scenario is unlikely, it cannot be ruled out.
You can't miss this. Madjar is turning things into a real next-generation meat grinder for the Russian army. Ukrainian strikes are now reaching places where just yesterday the Russians felt they were safely in the rear. And on the front line, the bunker soldiers are constantly looking over their shoulders. There are no safe zones. Madjar's birds have turned the front for the Russians into a field where death arrives faster than orders from headquarters. Swarms of drones are literally eating away at the occupiers' positions, and the so-called Second Army of the World now looks like a bewildered crowd trying to escape a storm. More details on how the Ukrainian drone machine is slowly grinding down the very foundation of Russia's war. Don't miss what's coming up next. Today, Ukrainian unmanned systems forces are no longer just about supporting the infantry. They are a separate structure that is gradually changing the very principle of warfare. Robert Brovdi, better known as Madjar, has essentially demonstrated how Ukraine is building a new military system right in the midst of war.
Our task is to take out the enemy's pilots. The primary objective of our mission is to severely restrict all logistical operations and movement. Let me put it this way. Any movement of personnel, preparation for assaults, and even to systematically limit any attempts at evacuation, ultimately, that occurs outside of our immediate awareness.
Numbers that until recently seemed like science fiction are now becoming the new reality at the front.
Over 300,000 targets have been hit since the formation of the group in 11 months. This accordingly is also transparent information. I'm stating the main point here. The average depth of enemy personnel destruction as of today does not exceed 1,500 meters from the front line. We are essentially working right under their feet.
And the new objective will achieve the stable elimination of up to 12,000 Russian soldiers each month.
Right now, the use of unmanned aerial vehicles is becoming the main component of the successful actions of Ukraine's defense forces. This makes it possible to neutralize the occupiers' advantage in manpower, heavy armored vehicles, and weaponry.
At the same time, Madjar is not just talking about the number of drones. The main focus is on systematic operations. The forces of unmanned systems are already being integrated into Army Corps to quickly reinforce the hottest sectors of the front and operate at operational depth. In
more than half of the Corps, unmanned systems units have already been deployed and assigned to the following missions. The first is closing gaps in MDPC. The second objective involves actively facilitating and providing comprehensive assistance in the seamless integration of centralized mission control systems, so that every single operational unit involved, ultimately, maintains a detailed electronic record of every individual flight mission that takes place across the entire battlefield.
a separate indicator that highlights the effectiveness of the system is the level of confirmed strikes. In the SBS, it exceeds 99%.
If necessary, it requires the pilot to conduct additional reconnaissance to obtain further information confirming the destruction, and therefore the percentage of confirmed hits in the units of the group exceeds 99%. In the 414th Brigade, the deviation is less than 1%. There was a month when the deviation was 0.2%.
Another critical factor is the depth of the strikes. Today, the effective strike range of Ukrainian drones in many directions is setting records.
It is precisely this distance that forms the so-called gray zone, which is now fashionable to call the kill zone. As of today, I estimate it in different areas to be 25 kilometers or more.
Russia maintains a high level of troop numbers at the front. At the same time, the pace of mobilization is not significantly increasing.
It seems to her that since he hasn't carried out those mobilization measures and has declared that he still hasn't launched a full-scale war, well, by autumn he won't be able to do it. He will continue to work with the contingent he currently has. And he has 700,000+ around the front line.
At the same time, Ukraine is focusing not on quantity, but on the effectiveness of every element of the system. In the drone forces, they are even establishing clear indicators of effectiveness.
A single specialized drone brigade destroys the infantry of 2 mechanized infantry brigades each and every month over the course of the entire year. Then the subsequent strategic benchmark was established for the unit to destroy every single day at least 1 full enemy assault group belonging to 1 acrobat battalion.
In a rather surprising turn of events, Russia is now attempting to replicate the Ukrainian drone force system.
They are essentially copying the existing franchise, the franchise of the drone force grouping. Well, they do have some of their own experience in certain areas, but for the most part, they try to steal or copy something from us and follow a ready-made, proven path.
After drones became one of the key factors in this war, the Russian army began to reorganize its own units.
The positive experience of the Ukrainian side, both in terms of slowing down the advance directly on the line of contact and the successful use of drones to destroy aerodynamic means of attack, is being taken into account and accordingly scaled up by the army of the occupying country.
Another important element that Madjar mentions is strikes against air defense systems. According to him, since the beginning of the year, 134 enemy air defense targets have already been destroyed.
This is a striking and highly illustrative example of successfully breaching and clearing a corridor for the unhindered movement and achievement of objectives by a substantially larger contingent of strategic assets, directly at a considerable and impactful depth of engagement.
Ukraine continues to develop and strengthen its unmanned systems forces, increasing the depth and effectiveness of its strikes. Even more powerful deep strikes and further changes on the front line lie ahead.
Here, the priorities have been, are, and will remain military facilities, military industrial complex sites, and fuel and energy infrastructure. Accordingly, these are legitimate military targets, and they should be burning across the entire territory of the occupying country as a priority.
That's all for today. This was me, Darina Hatsakalo. Even more scorching news in our next episode. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.